Here we'll perform another hypothesis test. I've written the 7 steps that we followed previously on the right side. Let's read the question and follow these 7 steps. In a Gallup poll of 1,018 randomly selected adults, 9% said that the cloning of humans should be allowed. Use a 0.1 significance level to test the claim that at most, 10% of all adults say that the cloning of humans should be allowed. Let's begin with step 1, writing the claim. The claim that's written here says at most 10% of all adults say that the cloning of humans should be allowed. Now, first thing I notice is that we have a percentage. When you have percentage, you use little p for your claim. We also see the words at most. At most means less or equal to. And so the symbol we use is less than or equal to. The number we use, 10%. Remember that 10% is the same thing as saying 0.1. Also remember that if you have equal to in your claim, that means the claim is the null hypothesis. If it didn't have equal to, we would have to say it's the alternate. Let's begin writing the claim now. We'll use the letter P, and we'll say less than or equal to 0.1. Now, that's the null hypothesis, and it is also the claim. That means now for step 2, we can write the alternate hypothesis. The opposite of less than or equal to is greater. We'll still use little p, and we'll still use 0.1. Now let's think about our possible outcomes for step 3. So the first outcome is if big P is less than or equal to alpha, that means we have strong evidence. It means we could reject the null hypothesis. Imagine if we crossed out the null hypothesis, we would also be crossing the claim out with it. So, in this case, we would reject the claim in the event that big P is less than or equal to alpha. Now, in the event that big P was greater than alpha, we would have evidence that is not strong. Therefore, we would fail to reject the null hypothesis. And that means we can't reject the claim, because we would have to box it in and stick with the null. Now let's move on to step 4, where we calculate the test statistic. To calculate the test statistic, we'll use this equation. We'll call our test statistic z, and we'll use parentheses p hat minus p, divide by square root of p times q divided by n. Let's put some places for those in Excel. We'll have p, which is the claim proportion. We'll have p hat, which is the sample proportion. We'll have q, which is 1 minus p, and n, which will be the size of the sample. Now, our claim proportion is written in the claim. We have that the null hypothesis says that little p is less than or equal to 0.1. That's what we'll put for our claim proportion. To find q, we'll say that equals 1 minus the p we just found. Now we'll have to go back to the question to get the p hat and the n. Now the sample proportion, p hat, was given to us in the first line. We were told that 9% agreed that the cloning of humans should be allowed. We'll place that in the p hat position. We'll say 0.09. Now the n will be the size of the sample. This is also given to us in line 1 because we have 1,018 randomly selected adults. We'll enter that for the size of the sample. Now we'll need to make some more room and calculate our z. For the z, we'll call this the test statistic, and we'll enter equals, parentheses, p hat subtract p. Close the parentheses and divide by square root of p multiply q divide n. This gives us a test statistic of about negative 1.06. Now, after that, we will need to find the big P value for step 5. So let's recall that our big P, if we have a left tail test, will be norm S dist, enter the Z, and say true. For the right tail, we just say 1 minus the big P for the left tail. If we have two tail, we'll say 2 times whichever of the left or the right is lower using the min function. Let's put places for those in Excel as well. For the left tail, we'll say equals norm S dist, click on the Z value, and say true. For the right tail, we'll say 1 minus the left tail. And for the two tail, we'll say 2 times min parentheses and select the left and the right with the blue box. To figure out which tail to use, we look to the alternate hypothesis. The alternate hypothesis says greater than. If you have a greater than, we use the right tail. If we have less than, use the left tail. And then if you have not equal to for the alternate, use the two tail. Again, we're looking only at the alternate here. Now, since our alternate says greater than, we'll say the right tail is the answer. Now, for step 6, let's compare our big P against our alpha. Now, our big P was 0.856. Our alpha was 0.1. Therefore, we can say our big P is much higher than our alpha. Now, when big P is greater than alpha, that means we don't have strong evidence. This means we fail to reject the null hypothesis and we have to box it in. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the null hypothesis has to be true. It just means based on the evidence we have, we can't cross it out, so we have to stick to it. This also means that we can't cross out the claim either, because the claim is part of the null. So we can say that there isn't sufficient evidence to reject the claim. Now let's reread the wording in the question and restate it. The claim was that at most 10% of all adults say that cloning of humans should be allowed. We might also want to mention that we have failed to reject the null hypothesis at a significance level of 0.1. And so we have our result.